And welcome to In Depth. We are in the middle of the long, hot summer in more ways than one. Washington, D.C. is at the center of major issues right now that are slowly coming to a head, from gun control, tariffs, immigration, to health care. Joining me tonight is Indiana Republican Senator Mike Braun, who is in the first year of his first term in the Senate chamber. He is barnstorming the state, visiting 50 cities while on recess. And we are going to be talking about several topics tonight. Senator Braun, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to cut to the chase right now. 31 people killed, more than 50 wounded in a period separated just 13 hours in this country. What is it going to take in Washington to get both sides of this issue away from that pattern of rhetoric to actual action, doing something, doing anything?
You know, when I heard about everything that occurred over the weekend, I said to myself, this feels different. And, of course, I've been a staunch supporter of Second Amendment rights. And so it's always tough because the tendency is to try to, do something that's going to impinge upon that. But you've got privacy at play here because a lot of the stuff that we may need to do, that's an issue. You get freedom of speech because you don't want to squelch that when people are out there having their point of view. But I think we crossed the threshold this time that we've had a law on the books, for some time that tries to ferret out, indications when somebody is going to, maybe use a gun in the wrong way. And I think that's going to be the focus this time around. Been attempts to do it before, and I think that you need that capability when somebody, before they get to the point of declaring a manifesto, if there are indications, we've got to start compiling it and try to prevent it in that way.
Selective background checks as opposed to universal background checks, and that is where both sides are really crossing paths and locking horns. How do you do selective background checks in this day and age? How do you say that person right there, that person needs to be brought in to a court of law and basically...
Those are all the things we're going to have to flesh out, but it's going to be between trying to prevent it in the first place by taking the information that's out there and then having background checks, which always cause heartburn among Second Amendment
and why
advocates.
Is that? Why is that, Senator? I mean, we could use the driver's license analogy. But why would a universal background check make someone nervous who's a law-abiding citizen?
Because I think people are afraid that it's going to impact law-abiding citizens more than where it needs to be aimed. And that would be at criminals and the mentally ill. And I think the mentally ill are going to be the focus of what we try to do because it seems like there's always an indication of that. If you get into blanket universal background checks, it probably at this stage of the game will push too far to where we don't get something across. I tell all my friends that, we're supported by the NRA. I was too, Todd Young was. If we as conservatives and Republicans don't do something, though, we end up risking that something more drastically is done down the road that could really impact your ability to, keep and bear arms. So I think this time around we will do something that's going to try to prevent. Indiana has had a law, as well as other states, that enable that to happen. And suicide is 60% of the deaths from a firearm. I didn't know that. 38% would be homicides. 1% would be mass shootings, and I thought that was more. 1% is accidental. Any death from a gun that can be prevented, where you're not impinging upon your basic right as a law-abiding citizen, I think that's going to be in play this time around.
I've talked to law enforcement officers, and one very troubling statistic is that suicide rates among law enforcement officers in this country are skyrocketing, and some attribute that to what they are being put through, the pressures, possibly having to enter a school where someone has entered that building and started shooting kids. I'm going to move on now to the economy. Tariffs. This affects Wall Street. It affected it in a big way this week when China basically devalued its currency, but that could trickle down to consumers. Do you feel the president's gone too far on this, or do you support him?
It's very simple, and this is an area where, you know, my background as a Main Street entrepreneur, the economy is as good as I've ever seen it. When we did the Tax Act, I wasn't there, and Jobs Act back in December of 2017, it set the stage for what we've got now. It's the longest period of prosperity that we've possibly had ever. We've got an economy that is growing at closer to 3%, where during the Obama years, it struggled to get much above 1.5%. Regulations have been backed off. You need regulations, but you don't need to be over-regulated. I can tell you that is working. People are afraid that we're going to torpedo that with tariffs. That gets at, do you take China on now, or do you wait till they're our size as an economy? And do you hold them accountable for intellectual property theft? When you go to do business there, where they force technology transfers to learn how to do it once you do go there. Subsidized industries dump gluts. Tariffs are one of the mild things they do, and now they've been tabbed a currency manipulator.
Healthcare costs. You support the president's call for importing drugs from Canada. And we're running out of time, so if you can sum that up.
Healthcare is the biggest deal when I ran, and it is now. It's where we've got bipartisan support. And like I tell the industry, you better get with it. The problems that we're dealing with, lack of transparency, no competition, high costs, big pharma, big healthcare, big hospitals know what to do. There are many of us nudging them to fix it themselves. If not, they'll have a more drastic solution.
Briefly, the immigration crisis, the controversial ICE raids that where children left school that one day and their parents were gone because they had been taken into custody. Is that sending a bad message, or how do you respond to that?
It's all due to the fact that if you had work visas and you had more legal immigration, which almost all of us are for, it's getting caught up with the fact that we don't have border security. Until we get border security, and the Democrats were all for that, and are on record just a couple years ago, and I think are looking at it politically, and basically are supporting things that look like open borders. I think that's going to be an issue that grows stronger as we reach November of 2020.
And I'll mention on closing here, Harmony Way Bridge Act has been signed by President Trump, and that'll could have a potentially huge impact on southwestern Indiana, particularly.
That was my first bill that got through, and along with a few others now, and involved in a lot of others, especially on the fronts of health care. Joni Ernst and I from Iowa have one to talk about waters of the U.S., which affects a lot of farmers, to get that back to a sane way of doing your basic ditch maintenance.
All right. Indiana Senator Mike Braun, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.